Let's discuss some of the trends affecting IT services right now: AI, regulation, employment, and even the role of the press. To get a unique perspective, let's travel across the Atlantic to hear from UK-based journalist Simon Quicke of Computer Weekly and Microscope. There's real value in understanding the differences in the markets. Welcome to the Business of Tech Lounge, the live version of the Business of Tech podcast. It's Wednesday, October 30th, 2024, and I'm Dave Sobel. I'll take questions and comments throughout the show, so make sure to put them in chat. If you have a question, we will happily respond to it. Now, I want to thank SalesBuilder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes this show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. As a reminder, I am distinctly watching the chat for your questions and comments. Well, Simon Quicke is a seasoned journalist with extensive experience covering the IT channel and managed services for Computer Weekly and Microscope. He's known for his in-depth analysis and keen understanding of the evolving technology landscape, and Simon provides valuable insights into trends, challenges, and the strategic shifts within the IT and MSP industries. Simon, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Dave. Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you. And we've known one another all the way back to my MSP days, as well as my time on the vendor side, particularly as we moved into the UK. So it's good fun to get back a chance to talk a little bit.
Likewise. Yeah.
Now I'm going to kick it off with kind of the topic that we're all talking about, which is AI, right? And what I thought would be interesting to get a little bit is I'd really like to get a sense, as somebody who's covering the space and reporting on all the moves right now, give me a little bit of what you're hearing specifically from the field about what MSPs, IT services, VARs, like whatever they call themselves, are really doing with AI in the field. Like what are some of the stories you're tracking right now?
Well, it's been an interesting, I guess, evolution over the course of this year. If you think about it, it started off with everybody talking about use cases and saying, we really want to sell AI, we want to get involved, we see there's potential for it. You know, the sales pitch to the customer was quite compelling. You get these productivity uplifts, you get these fantastic business insights. But it was almost as if the use cases were not quite there. And then everybody latched onto Copilot and said, this is it. You know, this is Microsoft's pushing this. Finally, there's something. But talking to people recently, even that I don't think has yet had the breakthrough that people were hoping for, because I think this isn't just a question of dropping a little piece of technology or even a big piece of technology, drop it in, press the button, and then, wow, here we go. This AI is more of I think, a cultural shift. And so two things I think are happening. One, the customers are starting to get used to it, starting to work out, well, what can it actually do? But on the flip side, I think you're seeing the channel at the same time embrace it as well. So there are more and more partners who are going all in with Copilot, but using AI and automated tools themselves. I mean, there's that classic line, you drink your own medicine. Why should I buy from somebody I don't believe really knows or believes in it themselves? But certainly there's a sense, I think, which is, okay, look, this year has been exciting. It's been good. There's been advances. There's been a lot of knowledge. But next year is going to be the year where we really start to see not just the use cases, but I think this cultural change at the customer level where the customer understands, this is how I use the technology. This is what it can do. I think at the moment it's still pitched far too black and white, that people say this is a fantastic, almost like a silver bullet, this is going to do amazing things. And we've seen the channel do that before, and then customers get frustrated and the backlash on the MSP community. So I think that's where we're at. Certainly it's, like I say, dual process. The customers are working out how to use it, but equally we're seeing more and more inventive adoption of AI within the MSP community.
That's been my sense too, and it totally aligns with. So Gartner just in the past couple of days have said that they've put generative AI as sort of like, you know, coming out of the peak of inflated expectation, or coming out of the trough. And additionally, I just was digging into, and we talked a little bit as we were prepping here. You know, there's two reports that I like to put side to side. The first was The Information did a whole bunch of coverage showing Microsoft is having trouble selling it, right? They're having trouble getting Copilot adoption. Yet Forrester just puts out some information saying that that we're seeing productivity uplifts. And I'm inclined to believe both sources because they're both they're both well researched and well trusted. So I don't think either one is coming at this wrong, but I think it's exactly showing hey, some people are figuring out productivity. I'm not necessarily sure everyone is convinced they're ready to pay for it yet. And I think the real hidden bit that was sort of behind all of this is you've got to do a lot of prep. Like you say about culture, you've got to get your data ready. You've got to have some sense of what you're going to use it for, how you're going to use it, the culture of what makes sense, like how people will do it, and get people embracing it. Because ultimately the interesting about this is not, this isn't selling a widget, right? This is selling a augmentative tool that humans need to use to do a good job with things. And I definitely know that my own experience with the tool, it has made me much more productive. I'm not a Copilot user, but I'm a heavy generative AI user for a lot of my stuff. But I also know that I have to check it all, that I have to verify all the stuff that I'm doing with it. What it's allowing me to do is produce more, but I've changed the way that I work. What's interesting is I think, circling that, I'd like to get your sense, are partners starting to settle into that area of, hey, this is a good consulting opportunity, this is a good advisory opportunity? Is that those the conversations you're having, and are they using those words?
Yes, very much so. But I think also don't underestimate the vendors here.
Okay.
So just to give you, I guess, the most topical example, because it happened yesterday, but the Cisco Partner Summit, Cisco outlined the fact that it's launching a new partner program in February 2026. But buried within all of those details was, I think, 80 million, well, at least $60 million, which is going on AI enablement for its channel partners, as a sort of recognition, I think, that they will have a major role in that consultancy piece, as you were saying, but they've got to have the skills. They've got to understand it first. So I think, those things are being set up now and being aligned. I think there's always that thing where it's almost like 1 + 1 = 2, but it doesn't. So, for instance, someone will say, give you an example, the customer has no security skills. The channel will fill the gap. Bingo, big opportunity. And you think, well,
right.
Yeah, same with AI, but the problem is that no, the channel, the MSPs can only fill that gap if they are skilled enough, and so there's a lot of activity happening there, a lot of talk about enablement, a lot of vendor partner programs using certifications and specifications to drive that behavior and reward it. And so again, I think that's why, although there's been hype all year, that's why it still feels like we're at relatively early stages of all of this.
Okay, well, we like early stages because that means there's still opportunity here. So that's good.
Yeah.
You've opened it up because I wanted to ask you and get a little sense of the market. One of the things that I always like to focus on is reminding everybody that, look, the number one expense line item for most IT services company, the vast majority of them, is people, right? And people remain the number one driver. There was a data set that just came out of CompTIA that I kind of wanted to get your perspective on, because they just done some specific analysis on the UK market for jobs, and they noted that there's a projected growth of 1.7% to create about 35,000 new jobs this year. And then by the end of 2023, the net tech employment reached over 2.1 million people, which is about 6.4% of the overall UK workforce. Apparently 72% of employers plan to increase staffing in tech roles. And that's an estimated almost 200,000 new jobs since 2018. And the median annual salary in the UK for tech workers is just shy of £45,000. So it's a slightly better job than the average market. Now, I kind of wanted to get your sense of how tight hiring is for IT providers. Like, are they scrambling for people? Is there a real skills gap? I mean, these feel like they with growth, there's good jobs there and they pay well. Give me a little bit of your insight into what's going on from a hiring perspective.
I think it's you've got to take even from that a step back, and it ties into what is your approach to, a lot of MSPs, particularly the larger ones here, have apprenticeship programs, and they are trying to, in a way, fill the skills gap by doing it themselves. So if you can bring on board the next generation, look after them, train them up. So there's a lot of investment going on in young people. There's quite a lot of effort in diversity. So the idea, how can we bring in people that potentially would never saw tech as an appealing career, particularly young girls and women? Can we bring more of those types of people who are often fantastically skilled once they're on the books? Can we get them involved? And so we're seeing that level of going on. And then the other trend is probably a greater awareness of the need for reskilling and upskilling within the business. So one of the things I've seen ever since managed services model emerged is, of course, this constant evolution, and you can never stay still. And so I think if you've actually got people sitting there, and so you've done the hard bit, you've hired them, you just need to keep training them and keep them. And again, AI, going back to that, this is where you need to arm them with those skills. So yeah, it's tough, I'm not going to lie. But I think that, like you say, the salaries, the reality is that particularly if you get a job in, say, cybersecurity, you're looking at quite a decent salary here. So young people are being drawn into those careers, but there's still stereotypes around it that it's quite geeky, quite male dominated, and you've got to be a technical whiz. And so, it's going to take time, but I do think certainly the channel is working very, very hard to dispel that. And some of the apprenticeship programs, I follow some of them and write about some of the efforts there. They're very imaginative, giving people the chance to work in every department and find their feet. So I think in many ways there's lots of efforts. It's not being solved overnight, but yeah, there's a gap out there. There's no doubt about it. And if the channel can fill it, then obviously those consultancy budgets go in their direction.
Oh, you've let the nugget out, and I want to highlight this because one of the reasons I love exploring the differences between the markets is I always quip that the markets rhyme, that they're very similar, but it's the differences that matter. You threw something in there that I want to sort of double click on and dive into, is because you were very casual and I talked to lots of organizations that have apprenticeship programs, and you threw it out like that's very commonplace, which I'm sure it is in the UK. And for my US listeners who must be going, oh, wait a second, that isn't something that is commonplace that all organizations immediately have. And there's a real lesson that right in that tidbit to say, like, look, there's a market that is filling this actively by building apprenticeship programs. That is a solution for American companies that are not thinking that way, because it isn't commonplace, and you can actually pull that competitive nugget out of that. I'm going to sort of riff on something. Is there something that you keep looking at the markets, because you're also a person who studies the markets a little bit, and say, like, there's something I wish other people recognized in their market, say an American thing or a European thing, that you've kind of highlighted as that fits that bit for you, that you're like, oh, I always wish more providers did that I see in other markets?
I think we were always told that the States, particularly with the MSP model, that the US was probably 2 or 3 years ahead of us, and that the UK, being a really big market in Europe, was probably then ahead of the rest of mainland Europe. I think the key thing is, for me, I guess it's just that sometimes you'll hear things and you think, I wish that was spoken about more widely. People are always trying to come up with their own little like catchphrases, because then they can say I was the person who invented that. But
sure,
the one thing I'm hearing increasingly more and more, it started with like one person, then another person said it, is at the moment the big thing here is outcome as a service. So the idea that a lot of the traditional managed services that were offered are just now almost taken as a given. And so you've got to now focus on the outcome. Don't talk about necessarily the technology. The customer doesn't want to deal with complexity, so just make it work. And so they're talking about outcomes. But I think for me, the constant thing is, I was talking to somebody earlier today about in distribution, saying what you need to do perhaps is amplify your value. And I think that's something I'd say to everybody across the channel, is the people in the channel aren't necessarily good all the time at amplifying their value. What is it you do, because so much within our world is taken for granted. Oh, you do enablement and onboarding. Yeah, but what does that look like? So I think, sometimes it's just a question of, you see it, different markets are better perhaps at blowing their trumpets a bit more, and maybe the Brits are not very good at that. But I think it's something, be proud of what you do, I think. And so, yeah, as we get more and more and more complex solutions being delivered and outcome as a service, I think the MSP community here should be very proud of the service it delivers.
Oh, I 100% echo that, and and I'll self-effacingly sort of tease and go, "You mean Americans too bold and brash sometimes? Never." I almost epitomize that exact stereotype sometimes. It's interesting because I've heard that that thematic idea of there being differences between the time frame in the markets, and I think that's missing a subtlety that is a little bit more about cultural buying techniques. What I've always generally observed is Americans are really fast to throw a credit card down and buy things, but that doesn't necessarily mean long-term follow-through. Whereas, a British audience, if I was, again, broad strokes, is more careful on that initial investment, but also much more committed to a long-term relationship. They've done the due diligence to commit to that, which means a longer-term relationship, which in theory would reduce churn. By the way, while we're talking, listeners, if you've got a question or comment, throw it in here, Simon, and I would love to hear from you. Because I'm going to throw some stats for everybody. Again, another one I was digging into, because people don't notice this at the same time. The UK is the third largest venture capital market globally. And in particular, fintech, software, green tech, and deep tech sectors are all specific areas. There have been £72 billion raised between 2021 and 2023. And its share of global VC investment increased from 3.4 to 5.8%. And in fintech specifically, it's 11.3% of global investment. So there's areas where, the markets do, keep to one another. And I think that it's important, particularly when we talk about SaaS, things move a lot faster because they are global rollouts. Now we've got, specific holdouts where technology does need to be both localized and you have to deal with the regulatory concerns, particularly across both the UK and the EU, where Americans will take abuse on anything. But that dynamic changes anything. Are there particularly the area I wanted to ask you about as well is kind of on the regulation front, because I talk all the time, on the show, the America is sort of the Wild West in terms of tech. The US at the federal level continues to have essentially zero laws that apply to technology in any way. Whereas both the EU and by extension the UK, either for laws that were then pre-existing, pre-Brexit, or also ones that have rolled out since, has much more of a technology landscape market. Like, are there particular regulatory trends that you're watching really closely and their impact on the channel?
Yeah, I think, well, you said it there. I think the interesting thing is, and I didn't vote for Brexit, so I'm just, that's a political thing. We won't get into.
I think we can all just say you have to live with it. So regardless of choice.
But the interesting thing was that one of obviously the aims of it was that we sort of cut our ties with Europe. But the reality of it is that, the big trends from a regulation point of view are still coming from the EU, because there's very, very few, particularly if you're an ambitious MSP, you want to sell, even selling in Ireland, you want to sell abroad, you want to support customers where the customers are. So in that sense, to be honest with you, although say GDPR, and then we might have our own flavor of it, the big things that are coming out of the EU still very, very much apply here, and they are still, to be frank, they're triggers for the channel to use in their pitches. So, it's remained a very highly regulated market.
Is that a proving to be kind of opportunity? Is it proving to be challenging, or is it just the typical mix of both? Like, what's it doing to the provider market?
It is both, but I think it's more of an opportunity, because I think, give you an example, take the Windows 10 end of life support in a year's time. in a sense, and there's a switch off here. It was delayed, but we were meant to have a big telecom change here when they switched off the PTSN network, and that got delayed. But things like that, in a sense, that the channel loved them because it's an opportunity to go and talk to customers. So again, the regulations, I mean, look, the challenge is, on one level, I can go to a customer and I can say, hey, are you ready for whatever it is, MIS 2 or DORA? Are you on top of this? And I can rattle the cage a bit and get them thinking, oh, we've got to invest. But the flip of that is you've got to be able to do it then, because you've got to be able to support that customer with regulation, and you've got to help them understand what they are, what they need to do. So yes, it's an opportunity, but you've really got to have invested yourself in making sure you can deliver it, because it's not for the faint-hearted. You can't just go in. You've got to really understand. So yes and no. And what you tend to get, I think, as specialists, it's a bit like our key verticals, like the public sector here, or, health, education, defense. It's pretty much the same characters, the same companies that work really, really hard. They have fantastic reputations, and that's their skill. And so I think if you are going to be somebody that leans on compliance and regulations heavily, you've got to invest.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense. Now, I want to bring up the one of the things that I always have a little bit of fun for listeners is, I love having journalists and analysts on the show, because I get to sort of the opportunity of like, hey, what's your thing that's top of mind? And as we were talking about it, the interesting thing you brought up, which I wanted to hear your thoughts on, was kind of the role of the press, particularly as you think about it from a channel perspective. How do you view the role of the press, particularly as you think about like channel, the delivery of value to the channel? What do you think is important about that role, and what's evolving and changing about
it? It's changed significantly, because if you think, there was a time, and so, you mentioned at the beginning, we go back quite a way, and I go back to when the internet was fairly infant. But the point about it is that there was a time when we told you, if you were a partner, we told you about the new partner program. We told you about how they were changing your rebates, all of that stuff. Now, if I was telling somebody that now, I'd be really concerned about their relationship with their supplier.
Sure.
So you still report on it, but you're trying to look for the trends. So you're trying to, I guess where it's changed is you're trying to go through and say, okay, what does AI mean? Is it time to move on it? If it is, what does good practice look like? And so you try and secure interviews with market leaders, you try and cover the main developments. And so you're looking for themes. I think, somebody like in one part of the market can do something, and then 2 or 3 weeks later, somebody else does something, and they might not know each other at all, but you start to think, hold on, something is happening. And I often think that's also the role of the press, which is to try and identify and say, look, something is changing, that, it's both opportunity and threat. Threat isn't necessarily in the sense of, oh, be careful, someone's going to put you out of business. I think they understand it's a competitive market. It's more about, I'll give you an example. A few years ago, everyone was talking about big data, and it never quite happened in the way that everyone said it would. So the threat there was, if you go off and you I don't know, you put a lot of time and money, and you have a 3 or 4 person team that's your big data team, and you say, right, we're ready now, let's go out and bring in significant revenues, and they never materialize. That's more of the threat. So you're trying to understand. But I think at the same time, the channel has professionalized itself an awful lot more, and it's become a business that is a lot more savvy. So you're dealing with people who are not just out to make a quick buck, like you were saying about the relationship that they're looking for with the customer. It's almost in a similar way that sometimes they're looking for that with us. So it's trying to give people a big picture. Where's it going? What should you be doing? Where should you be investing time and money?
Simon, it's really interesting that you say it that way, because thematically, it's kind of actually aligned exactly with the trend of what MSPs and IT services providers are focused on. You brought it up yourself, the idea of focusing on business outcomes. It's really interesting to think about how the trend of both the press has aligned with their customers on this, and you've sort of said it in a way I hadn't thought of before, which if the press's value is about the trends and the direction much more than the reporting, that completely aligns with what the value that the providers are delivering on. And it definitely aligns with some of the data that we're seeing in terms of the number of vendor relationships that any particular solution provider will engage with, because that number has actually started going down. And we're finding, vendor after vendor is reporting to me all of the reports where they've said, hey, we've started seeing consolidation of vendor relationships, less vendor relationships. The value of the vendor has started to diminish. Relationally, I think that the journalists and analysts are reacting to that, and savvy ones like you are saying, like, hey, I need to spend more of my time on the trends. So as we sort of wrap up here a little bit, I kind of want to get a little bit of the look. We both know that oftentimes you only have so many hours in the day, and you're trying to track a lot of different stories and trends. What's the one that you kind of are intrigued by but haven't had enough time to cover in terms of trends that you're sort of keeping an eye on?
I think there's things sorry. I think there's things you try to follow which are going to be important. I'll give you an example like sustainability.
Okay.
You just know that that's important beyond the MSP community. This is like our planet we're talking about. And so I think you try and keep an eye on that. I mentioned earlier the apprenticeship stuff. I'm quite keen to make sure, obviously, you and I have spent an awful lot of time, you in the channel, me observing it. I care about the channel. I want the channel to last forever. So I try and you want to see those efforts being made, that the channel is securing its own future, it's making wise decisions, it's investing for its own future development. And so, you can't always write about everything that's going on. Some of it, it's what I guess some people call soft news. So you think, well, I let that one go. But certainly when I do get the chance, you might be able to sit down with somebody and say, what do you do? It's things like even mental health. It became a big issue in the UK channel during COVID because a lot of the people were living and working alone. It's just trying to make sure that we remember that this is a community. Yes, there's people selling and there's money that has to be made, but it's also a community of people that have an ability to do good beyond just, selling you a firewall and a router. So I think that's what I try and keep an eye on.
Oh, you know what? I cannot end on a more positive note than that one. And I would be remiss to listeners if I didn't highlight there's yet another person chiming in with sustainability on that. Simon, this has been awful lot of fun. Really appreciate you joining me for this. I look forward to a few more conversations ongoing as we continue rocking and rolling with this.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
And I also want to thank Sales Builder, our Patreon sponsor, whose support makes the show possible. Focus on your IT sales workflow with the power of automation and visit them at salesbuilder.com. That's BUILDR.com. And vendors, you too can get your name mentioned on the live show. It's a simple monthly subscription. Visit patreon.com/MSP Radio to learn more. And listeners, you can support the show. Like, share, and follow on your favorite platforms. It is the number one thing that helps the show continue to be here week in, week out. And you can support directly on Patreon with our Give What You Want model. You set what you think the content is worth, and you get access to videos early. If you have a question and are listening to the recording, send it in at question@mspradio.com. Thanks for joining me for the Business of Tech Lounge, and I will see you next time.